Hey, Lisa, I see Austin as an attendee.
Okay, I will let him in. Okay, Austin should be popping in momentarily. Let me just check.
Can everyone hear me?
Hey, Austin.
Thanks.
Okay, Mayor Furman, we are streaming and recording, so you can take it away.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is July 27, 2020. It's 7:06 p.m. and this is the Silverton Board of Trustees regular meeting. If we could please start with a roll call, Kelly.
Trustee Barella,
Here.
Trustee Harper,
Here.
Trustee Waiver,
Here.
Trustee Bierma,
Here.
Trustee Lashley,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Here.
Mayor Furman.
Here. Wonderful. Administrator Ryder, would you like to lead the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do we have any staff or board revisions to the agenda this evening?
I have one, Mr. Mayor. If we could consider moving the application for the Silverton Creative District First Friday event up to just before the consent agenda.
Just before the consent agenda. Sure thing. Any other additions or revisions to the agenda? Great. At this time, we will open this meeting for public comment. I will keep track of time. Everyone who wishes to speak will have 3 minutes. And this is not a back and forth, so we're not planning to respond to any comments, but if you'd like to speak, please click the raise hand button or at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on your phone, there's a way to do it as well, but I don't see anyone. Oh, there's one dial in. So Lisa, if you could remind our phone user how they would raise their hand, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. If you'd like to dial *9, that should activate a raise hand for anyone who is on the phone, and we can go ahead and activate you to speak then.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So I see one hand raised, Wes Berg. The floor is yours, Wes.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, my name is Wes Berg. I'm a resident here in town, and I'm also a wildlife photographer. And I have some of my stuff at a couple of the shops here in town. And I'm also, as part of that, am involved with the Silverton Creative District. And I wanted to ask, make a request or make a comment specifically about the upcoming event application for the Friday Art Walk. I had seen an email chain on that suggesting that some of the requirements for the COVID from the Jim Donovan and that group. I'm hoping this is a kind of miscommunication. We were told to request this as a special event, but it's really just about businesses being able to put out a table with some art so that it will attract people to come in during this 3-hour Friday event once a month. So it's people walking down the sidewalk. So we were requested to talk about screening participants, registration, and all of these things. It's, you know, you can't just accost people on the sidewalk to do that. So I hope it's just a miscommunication in terms of what is being requested. We were told to request this as a special event, and I'm hoping that the trustees will consider that and hopefully approve this so that we can maybe get a little bit more attendance to this event. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wes. All right, do we have any other public comment at this time? Seeing none, we will move to proclamations and presentations. I don't see any on the agenda, and we didn't have a revision, so we'll fly right past that to our new business, consideration of special event application, waiver of fees for Silverton Creative District Friday Art Walk. Administrator Ryder, do you know if we have someone on the line that's presenting this application, or are we just looking at the materials in the
I
packet?
think Lisa Branner can
Oh,
lead
wonderful.
that, Mayor Furman, and I think we do have Carol Wilkins in the audience, who is the president of the Silverton Creative District Board. So if she is called upon, she's available.
Fantastic.
Following up on that, yes, we do have both Beth Anderson and Carol Wilkins from the Creative District in the meeting tonight. I just activated both of them to speak, and I wanted to address Westberg's questions before we jump in. So the reason why these guys have been advised to apply for a special event application is because of the closure of the public right-of-way. They're requesting that a portion of the sidewalk in front of participating businesses be allowed to have artwork and other wares for sale out on the sidewalk. It will not block people's ability completely to move through the sidewalk space. It'll be just right up adjacent to the building, directly against the buildings of participating businesses. As for the question of the COVID-19 safety plan, Jim Donovan, as you know, has been working with all of our special events to make sure that they are following the right protocols and keeping people safe. I don't know if Carol and Beth have heard back from him, but we've had some email dialogue on this question because I believe from the Creative District's viewpoint, this is essentially just them having regular business hours for the galleries and businesses in town. They'll be following the same protocol they would be during their normal operating hours. They're just extending their hours into the evening and doing a little cross promotion around the idea of the art walk. So I don't know if we have resolution from Jim Donovan yet on that question of whether they need to jump through those hoops or if they can operate just as a normal business would in those hours. So that's my little prelude to that. You guys will also see on their event application, they are asking for a waiver of fees, the $100 special event application fee, and for nonprofits based in the 81433 zip code, there is no charge to close a street or a public right-of-way. So just to answer any questions about that in advance if there were any. We can certainly open it up to Beth and Carol if they would like to add anything at this point.
Thank you, Lisa. Do any of the trustees
Thank you,
have
Lisa.
any? Oh, go ahead, Beth.
This is Beth. Lisa, I think you covered everything, and I appreciate your synopsis. We have yet to hear back from the Office of Emergency Management as far as the COVID requirements that we received last week.
I'd just like to remind the trustees that you can approve this application contingent upon them getting Jim's approval. We do put all of our special event applications in front of the Office of Emergency Management, Public Works, a variety of other officials, depending upon what the event entails. So if you approve it tonight and Jim is not satisfied, they can continue working that out between now and their August event.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion to approve this event based on the contingencies that Lisa laid forward.
I would second that.
So we have a motion on the table. It's seconded. Any discussion, or Kelly, roll call, please, unless I see a hand. All right, roll call, please.
Trustee Varela,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bierma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. All right. Anyone have questions or comments to anything within the consent agenda to pull it out of the consent agenda? And if not, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Trustee Barella?
I just had the one question on the San Juan Basin Health, $4,300. That was a big chunk of change. Didn't know what it was for.
I am not seeing the $4,300, Trustee Barella.
Okay.
I believe it's $4,600.
Okay. Thank you. I can't pull it up right now
And I
either.
say, okay, that amount is for Guidebook, which is a marketing company we entered into a contract 3 years ago. This is the final payment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it supports our mobile app. We get placement in their printed materials and online advertising. And I don't, Lisa Brenner, if you wanted to expand at all on that provision, we actually tried to break that contract and get out of it, but we're unsuccessful. So we will make use of their final year with focus on the development of the mobile app.
Just to follow up on what Administrator Ryder said, we've had, I think this is going 5 years now, a contract with Guidebook, and this is the final year of the 3-year contract that was signed a couple years back. And, you know, just examining our budgets this year and really trying to trim everything that we could. We did look at that as a possible expense to trim, but we are locked into a contract and we're not able to extricate ourselves from that. So the approach that we're taking with it this year is to try to utilize it to drive business to Blair Street and focus on some of the other areas where we're feeling really impacted because of the train not running and because of the whole COVID-19 situation. So you may have noticed that the Prospector Pursuits treasure hunt that the Parks Recreation and Facilities Department came up with is being promoted there. We're going to promote a gallery like art walk, gallery tour, hopefully a Blair Street business tour, and just try to utilize it as best we can in this final year. And then we'll reassess as we get to the end of this contract year about whether or not we want to renew.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for that explanation.
Trustee Wiegert?
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Varela,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bierma,
Yep.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Administrator Ryder, I'll turn it over to you for staff reports.
Okay, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. I'd like to add a couple of things that weren't written that have come to my attention and feel appropriate to share with the public. First, I guess there's been several questions. I know I've received some on the current state of fire restrictions in the town and county. And I can report that as of today, while all 3 of the entities, meaning U.S. Forest Service, county, and town, have various levels of restriction in place, they're all watching the weather. We've appreciated the rain. They've appreciated the rain. So it's really being evaluated on a day-by-day, even week-by-week basis. The weather's expected to clear midweek. And the thought is right now we're keeping an eye on what the Forest Service wants to do. And then county and town will evaluate after that. But right now we don't have any concrete plans from the Forest Service or the county to ease any of the restrictions until we see how long. If Wednesday it's going to get clear again. It can be warm and dry here pretty quick. So probably at the end of this week again, OEM and the sheriff and the fire department will make another evaluation depending on what the weather's doing to see if it's appropriate to ease restrictions. And of course, we'll pay attention to what the Forest Service is doing. BLM still has no current fire restriction in place. The other big change from, I guess, last meeting to this meeting in the COVID restrictions is most of you, I'm sure, have heard of the 10 o'clock restriction on restaurants and bars. State mandate is now that they are now required to close at 10 o'clock. So that was the only significant movement on public health orders in the last week or so.
Administrator Ryder, just to clarify, was it that they have to close or that they have to stop serving alcohol?
I think it's close. Paul, do you know specifically?
I believe they have to stop serving alcohol at 10. Oh. And there's still some clarity that needs to come out of this on, when it's bought versus served, and how many drinks at one time. So I think there's still some unanswered questions there, but the last drink is at 10.
Yes, I stand corrected. That is, I'm looking at the PHO right now. It is alcohol sales only have to cease at 10 o'clock.
Trustee Barilla.
On the chamber chat that Deanne hosted with, I believe his name is Troy Huffman, he was clarifying what their perspective was of that as well. And it's pretty much everything has to be closed down by 10. So we'll get the determination. They're supposed to be here this week. And we'll be able to get with Becky and Troy and get the actual real determination coming in from the actual state of Colorado to the best of my knowledge. So hopefully we can all get on the same page after that.
Thank you. Back to you, Administrator Ryder.
I would entertain any other questions on the staff reports that the board has. I can report just briefly, we're working on the reprojection of financials through June. We've closed obviously June books, and I'm now working through all of the accounts in the budget, reprojecting again. The big change, hopefully positive, is going to come in August when we collect June sales tax receipts. June was busy, we know. July appears to be even better. It's tough to translate that right now without our first set of real numbers from those busy months. Just as we've talked before, there are a lot of people in town. There's a lot of people in the backcountry, a lot of transient people. Trustee Harper, reported last meeting, I think, that his hotel is seeing a almost twice as long average stay per guest. So these are all positive signs. We have to, balance that against the fact that restaurants can only operate at 50% capacity. Are these folks who are here in town, are they spending money? It would appear so. We continue to get positive reports off the street that people are seeing really good numbers, particularly in July. Campgrounds are full. I think we all can see the busyness on Main Street and Blair each weekend. Boy, both streets are just packed with people, with cars, parking. So it appears to be positive, and I'm keeping hopeful about that, but I really am gonna hold back judgment till I see those June sales tax numbers to see what this busyness is translating into sales and into ultimately sales tax. Trustee Barilla?
My question was to Todd. In here, it says upcoming issues, Silverton, Carnegie Library grant planning and next step. We haven't met at the library board for quite some time. So I was curious if this was something that we need to converse about as the library board before we look at moving forward. Has anybody been in communication with Jackie in reference to that?
Yeah, I can answer that. We talked about it. We may have even talked about it briefly with the board of just keeping that option open. So we've got the construction plans that have already been funded via grant. They are on the shelf ready to go. The State Historical Fund grants come in $200,000 maximum allocations each year, which would require a $50,000 match. We have some in the library fund. We would also talk to the Friends of the Library to see what they had, but it's nothing that we've started yet, Trustee Barella, but something we wanted to keep on the radar. Because this would be a great project to do, of course. And if we can feel comfortable about the match, then we would feel comfortable, asking the board or presenting to the board the option of going ahead with applying for this grant.
Okay.
So the first phase in construction is roof, foundation, basement floor, things that if we let go too long can be really damaging to the building. So we just want to keep the option open and keep it on town staff's radar, but we will have to work in conjunction with the library board for sure to see if it's a possibility this year.
So maybe then either you or I should get hold of Jackie, and maybe we should call a board meeting. Because we haven't had any because the library's closed. So, all right, thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak with her and get a library board scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Birma? Oh, you were just noting that Todd's hand is up.
Mm-hmm.
Todd, did you want to speak as well, or?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
I just wanted to note that I spoke with Jackie this week, and she already had a library board meeting planned for August, and she has added a general discussion of the grant to that agenda. I can't recall the date, but I believe it was the 2nd or 3rd week of August, and I'm sure she'll be reaching out to everyone soon.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Administrator Ryder, I wanted to ask a question or two about the budget. It seems like there's a lot of movement below the surface, but for the board's clarification, and perhaps the public as well, is there any thought about trying to decrease our spending below the 10% target that was set a few months ago? And then it sounded like the decision about putting some type of debt on the ballot in November needed to be pretty well thought out by mid to late August. And I was curious what progress we're making there.
There are a lot of moving pieces, Mayor Furman, and 10% is a soft target. We're going to try to do better than that. So we continue to look at each expense every day, what can be pushed off, what can be eliminated. We feel like we're running pretty lean right now. We have not gotten into any earnest discussion regarding staff cuts. That would be the next line item if we need to go lower than 10%. That's probably where we'd have to look next. As far as the debt financing, I did file with the county to keep the option open to put a ballot measure on in November if necessary. Right now, I think our first priority would be to borrow from another fund, primarily the Moelis Campground Fund that has a fairly sizable reserve in it. Second, I talked a little further with County Administrator Tookie about a lease purchase of the visitor center. He does not think the county can do that. So I am back to square one as far as an outside debt source. We can go to a bank and get a traditional loan and put up collateral. And that's probably the next direction I'm headed. I've talked to Citizens Bank a few times about establishing a line of credit. They're willing to do that. That's a short-term solution. The challenge with the letter of credit or a line of credit is that you have to pay it down to zero for 2 weeks each year, which could be difficult for us depending. So I'm going to flesh out other options. I've got Lisa Adair identifying all the vacant land that town currently owns. If necessary, it's possible we would look to sell some of those pieces of land. That's a very preliminary analysis that she's putting together for me. But that's where we are right now. Debt financing with the town is going to almost certainly require a vote, and our options are limited. We still don't see anything. We hear rumors and some things. I know Senator Bennett is working hard to try to free up federal money for small communities and revenue replacement, but nothing concrete so far that I've seen.
Thank you. Did the 10% reduction across the board apply to the contracts that the town pays for other services or shared services between the town and county?
No. There is another option there that I haven't discussed with Administrator Tookie, so I don't mean to put him or surprise him, but you know, it's possible we could look to defer some of those payments. But for right now, fire and sheriff and the other entities, EMS, that we share with the county, we have not looked to reduce those yet.
Is it possible that they have room in their budgets that wouldn't reduce their scope of services? I mean, I haven't seen any of those budgets in depth to know whether or not they have like development expenses or other things that wouldn't reduce their ability to provide emergency services for the town. Yeah, I'd have to examine that further before I could answer accurately, Mayor Furman, and I will look into that. I do also have on the schedule, school is coming and CAG is coming next meeting to do presentations, but I am reaching out to sheriff, fire, and EMS so that they could do their quarterly reports as we've discussed, and they might be able to expand further on that as well. Is the goal to loop together Q1 and Q2 for those meetings? Yes, it would be a year-to-date report. Cool. Trustee Barella?
So I'm curious because you brought up the IGAs. If they're already contractual, what gives us any leeway? Paul, could you answer that?
I'm not completely familiar with all the IGAs out there and have to look at those closer to see if there's any leeway in there.
Thank you.
I mean, my first thought was we might not be able to adjust the current budget, but we certainly could ask them to plan for a reduction going into next year to start making up our shortfall. All right, any other trustee questions about staff reports? Great. Moving along to trustee reports. Who'd like to go first? Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Trustee Bierma. I'm just got really excited about Kendall because we had the request for information deadline last week, and there were we had 5 responses to that, which I think is really exciting. And we had planned to meet tomorrow to discuss those as a committee, and just Miss Branner's had a family emergency, and so to be able to do that with Fidelity, we'll likely be rescheduling that for next week. But just to be, you know, completely transparent and share the information with the public, the plan is to make the submissions to the RFI available, if possible, ahead of our committee meeting. So we can have those out and available.
Thank you. Trustee Bierma?
Yes, I'll share out on the Parks and Rec Committee met on the 17th. So this is mainly just an overview of Lisa's role, because we kind of ran out of time at our previous meeting to discuss that. Managing community relations and how it's a lot of planning focus with the Kendall Mountain Master Plan, Silverton Areas Trails Plan, a lot of community engagement, facility bookings for rentals, for weddings, etc., and kind of marketing through those events. And then she kind of gave us a rundown on the history of the fee structure. And in the past, town has lost money hosting events, and kind of the revamp of the fee structure that has happened in the last few years, and potentially could be some more brainstorming around that for the future around events. And then we just got a really brief update from Todd just about Molus, that it's been pretty packed this summer, but we kind of ran out of time to go through the rest of the stuff we wanted to talk about. So yeah, feel free to fill in, Mayor Pro Tem, if I forgot anything, but I think that covers most of it.
Yeah, there on that fee conversation, the one other thing that we kind of had to talk about was the fee waivers, and trying to think through how that might look on an annual basis, so that events that happen earlier in the year, you know, they're sort of set up to make use of that line item in the budget that Mr. Ryder spoke to a couple of meetings ago. I think that we have sort of a certain amount that we have allocated to support events, and especially our local nonprofits. But if your event is later in the year, potentially, you know, that money has already been given away. So just trying to think of a structure so that if you have an event in a shoulder season or in December or something, that you don't just come to it at the end of the bottom of the barrel. And just ability to not have, you know, potentially there's some not favoritism, but it's just preference to events happening earlier. So thinking about how to create fairness in that allocation as well.
Thanks for adding to that.
Thank you. Trustee Barella?
So I've been asked a question several times about the poles and the missing signs on the poles. I know that San Miguel Power said basically these are our poles, get your stuff off. But I've been asked where the missing signs are, what the plan is moving forward, and how we're going to put in new signage in order to have, you know, the signs back that are gone that were on the power poles. So I don't know if John Seitz is available to answer that question, or if that's something Mr. Ryder can talk to us about, if we have any further information on what's happening there.
Trustee Barella, for context, could you describe where these poles are? Is this throughout town or in a specific place?
Throughout town, we'd historically always used the power poles that were provided by San Miguel Power as sign hangers. So that way, when I was a kid, 40, 50 years ago, so a lot of them are not on there anymore because those poles do belong to the power company.
What signs are on them? Sorry, Trustee Barella.
Pick one, the snow route signs, the OHV signs. I mean, a multitude of signs have been on those poles for forever. So I just don't know where we're going with this, or how we're moving forward, or if we even have a plan yet. And if we don't, then what are we going to look at for the future to create one? I know I donated all those poles without bases that were the old CDOT ones to the town of Silverton that Todd and somebody else came out to my property in Durango and picked up. So hopefully those are usable with minimal cost to the town. But I've been asked that question so many times. I just don't know what the answer is right now.
Yeah, the only thing I can tell you is it was about 3 years in the making, as I understand it, contentious with San Miguel. I'm not sure if the town had any agreement with San Miguel several years ago to put them up in the first place, but they got very insistent this year that we take them down, that they were not allowed on their poles. As far as a contingency plan backup, I know John Seitz has been thinking through ideas. It just has simply not been a top priority to address at this moment, but I've got it written down and we'll push it up the priority list. I'll talk with John to see what, if anything, he can do in the interim to get some signage back up.
Okay, so that's a better answer than what I had before. So I'll be able to tell those who've asked that there is something in the works. We just don't know the meat.
Well,
and
it's almost certainly going to be, going to require us putting in our own poles to put the signs back up. So location, we're already, I think, sign heavy in this town. So it's an issue part of it's a sub issue of a bigger issue. And that signage throughout town is pretty messy right now.
Yep.
And that would be yet another element to address.
Thank you.
Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for us to kind of integrate when we do a new wayfinding plan to kind of figure out exactly which signs are most necessary and kind of getting it into an overall sign plan, because I think we discussed at length that we have way too many signs in town. So kind of simplifying and codifying which signs are most important and trying to make a better wayfinding plan is probably a good thing to do.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you, Trustee Lashley. Any other trustees attend any committee meetings they would like to talk about? Trustee Wiegert.
Talk about the planning commission meeting we had. We did go through the ADU ordinance and make some modifications to that. The planning commission did recommend approval. And so hopefully that will be coming to the board here shortly. And then the second order of business was a proposed house/office structure at the propane bulk plant. And that being located in the blue zone of the avalanche path led to a pretty lengthy discussion. But in the end, we did decide to recommend for approval with the lengthy contingency list that was compiled by our planning director, Ms. Adair. And I think that's about it, unless Trustee Harper has anything else he'd like to add.
No, thank you, Trustee Wiegert. You did a great job, sir.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Trustee Wiegert, the ADU ordinance is scheduled for the August 10th regular board meeting to have a look at.
All right, very good.
Fantastic. Trustee Harper, yeah.
Yeah, I had a quick question regarding public works and road condition. More specifically, the road between Green and the post office. There is a ton of potholes, and it's getting even worse. And I didn't know if we had, and I didn't see any updates on road improvements on John Sight's report.
I don't know if John is on the phone to answer. I will follow up with him and find out if he's got anything specific scheduled for that area. And if not, we can make that happen.
All right, I'll go. We did not have a master plan committee meeting since the last meeting, but we did have our deadline for submissions for the 2 open positions, and we received 7 applicants, and we will be discussing those applicants at a meeting tomorrow and making the selections. And it was a pretty good cross section of community members that we got from those 7 applicants, so that was pretty exciting. We had an ordinance, personnel, and communications committee meeting, which we've already covered the substance of pretty much with the review of the draft ADU ordinance. And it's good to hear that that went to the planning commission and is going to be in front of this board at the next meeting. And then they hinted that that staff has been working on the vacation rental ordinance as well, and looking towards some of the requirements around the land in Abbey Pass and looking for potential uses for that land during the summer. I also attended a Colorado Association of Ski Town webinar discussing outlook for this coming winter with a bunch of the head ops people at larger resorts around the United States. Quite a misnomer. It appears that the Colorado Association of Ski Town is not limited to Colorado. There's Canadian resorts and a bunch of other North American resorts. Surprising to me, but I guess not surprising, was that the biggest issue that they're anticipating is the lack of the J-1 visa program, being anywhere from 30 to 60% of their employment. So if you know any young people that are looking for jobs, this season is going to be a great time to try and get one at a resort. Otherwise, they're looking to be really busy. Season pass sales sound strong across all resorts in North America. And my takeaway was that they're spending a lot of time looking for touchless processes, and the biggest issue is going to be boot fittings. And even though we only have a very tiny little area here, that might be something for us to consider as well with the rental shop and figuring out how we can safely do more of a touchless process for ticket sales and ski rentals. Trustee Barella?
So in that meeting, they were actually talking about everybody being open in the United States.
Yes, they were talking about all resorts being open. They're expecting pretty much full capacity. There's some discussion at some resorts about a fast lane for season pass holders, which they think will be more local based and be less of a risk, and then having more dispersed lines for day ticket sales. And then they're grouping people who travel together as opposed to nuclear families on chairlifts and gondolas and trams, and then doing a very, very limited occupancy for people that don't know each other. So like 2 people on a 5-person chair or 1 person in a gondola. And that was kind of interesting. They are expecting the US-Canadian border to be closed throughout the winter. So everyone's also refocusing their marketing efforts on driving traffic rather than flying traffic, which could be really interesting for Silverton if you're expecting lines at regular ski areas to be significantly longer than normal, and the Front Range not being able to fly to other resorts around the United States or out of the country. We may see some more of that backcountry and heli-based traffic coming to Silverton Mountain this year, assuming Silverton Mountain has all the protocols they need to operate a good system this winter. And that's what I had for updates of the last 2 weeks. All right, any other comments or questions before we move along to continued business? Wonderful. All right, we will now move to the public hearing and second reading of Ordinance 2020-01, vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and adjacent to the eastern municipal town boundary. Attorney Kosnick, what's the process for a public hearing, since this is this board's first go at it?
Well, this would be the second reading, and go ahead and do the reading again. And then there would be a board discussion, and it has to be opened up to the public for public comment during its consideration though. If it's approved, then it's published, and there's a 30-day period before it would go into effect.
Thank you. Last time I read the ordinance, would someone else like to take a stab at it, or would you like me to do it again? Okay. Ordinance number 2020-01, an ordinance vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and north of Campground Road. Whereas the town of Silverton, Colorado, the town is a statutory town under the laws of the state of Colorado. Whereas since approximately 1971, the town has leased to private landowners certain platted streets and alleys located within an area currently operated as Silverton Lakes RV Resort LLC, Silverton Lakes. Whereas the leased platted streets and alleys have never been improved for such purpose, and an area of the leased platted streets and alleys is designated as wetlands by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Army Corps. Whereas the Army Corps has alleged that streets and alleys that are leased to Silverton Lakes were disturbed in violation of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. Whereas the town and Silverton Lakes have worked in cooperation to create a mitigation and monitoring plan, the mitigation and monitoring plan that remedies the alleged violations. Whereas in conjunction with the mitigation and monitoring plan and in an effort to comprehensively address the area leased to Silverton Lakes, the town and Silverton Lakes have discussed and conceptually agreed to amend the existing lease through the amended and restated lease agreement, grant easements to the town through the exclusive wetlands easement agreement and campground road and trail easement agreement, transfer property to the town through the quitclaim deed, and vacate certain streets and alleys through this ordinance. Whereas pursuant to section 16-1-70 of the Silverton Municipal Code, the vacation of streets and alleys is allowed when, in the opinion of the Board of Trustees of the town of Silverton, defined as the Board of Trustees, it is found and determined that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of such portions of said streets and alleys. Whereas Colorado statute allows for the Board of Trustees to vacate streets and alleys located within the municipal limits subject to any provision of the Constitution and the statutes of the state of Colorado. And whereas the Board of Trustees finds and determines that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of the streets and alleys identified in Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto. Now therefore be it ordained by the Board of Trustees of the town of Silverton, Colorado, Section 1, the Board of Trustees finds and determines that the public use, convenience, and necessity have not for a long time past required and do not now require the use of the streets and alleys identified on Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto, define the streets and alleys, in order to cooperatively work with Silverton Lakes in formulating a remedy to the alleged violation of Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. The Board of Trustees further finds that vacation of the streets and alleys is a reasonable and necessary action. Section 2, the vacation of the streets and alleys shall not leave any land adjoining the streets and alleys without established public road or private access easement connecting said land with another public road. Section 3, the streets and alleys as described on Exhibit A and depicted on Exhibit B attached hereto and incorporated herein are hereby vacated through this ordinance. Section 4, the title to the streets and alleys shall vest in accordance with the provisions of CRS Section 43-2-302. Section 5, all rights of way or easements heretofore existing or granted by the town of Silverton for electricity, cable, gas, sewer, water, or similar pipelines and appurtenances, and for ditches or canals are hereby reserved and preserved for the continued use of any such rights of way or easements for any and all of said purposes. Section 6, this ordinance shall take effect and be in force on the 30th day after it has been published. Introduced, read, passed, and adopted and ordered published this blank day of July 2020, and then there are the SIG blocks. There's also a lengthy Exhibit A describing the location, as well as an Exhibit B with images, a map. Attorney Kosnick, does that suffice for our second reading?
Yes, it does, Mayor. And if you please, I can go through the three changes that were made since the previous first reading, if that's helpful.
Please, thank you.
Sure. The first change is on the first page. It's the sixth whereas down, and it was just modified to identify specifically the other agreements that the board will be considering if this ordinance is passed. The second change was in section 1 on the second page, and it previously deleted and kind of rearranged a sentence to make it flow a little better as the board directed at the last meeting. And the final change was in section 4, where the term streets and alleys was inserted in capital letters to link kind of to the definition that was previously provided in the ordinance here. So those were the three changes that were made and part of the publication that went out after the first reading. And I'll just add too that the ordinance is, although a separate item than the other documents, is kind of part of a package and should be considered, although you're not considering those other documents right now, it should be considered in light of those other documents. So they're separate items, but really all those other documents should be in your mind when you're talking about and considering this one.
So I had a question. What in this set of documents or ordinance would govern the situation where Silverton Lakes sells the property? Let's say they do that next year. What happens to the monitoring plan and any costs associated with the remediation plan, and our indemnity that protects us from being liable to the Army Corps for any future damage?
So the monitoring plan itself runs with the land. So a subsequent purchaser of that property would also take that subject to the monitoring plan. There is also a portion of the Silverton Lakes property that is going to be deed restricted as well. That's that portion that is being revegetated, kind of in the northwest corner there. And then as far as the indemnity goes, the indemnity, it depends on which one you're talking about. If you're talking about the release itself, that's the last document, then that is all heirs of Silverton Lakes would also be subject to that document as well. As far as it does not specifically run with the land, so it wouldn't show up as part of like a title commitment if a new purchaser, but if there was a purchase of, say, the business itself, then it would be then it would be part of that transaction. Some of the other documents that have specific indemnifications in there, some of them do run with the land, and other ones are. So let me look here. I think all the other documents run with the land. And does that make sense to everybody, like what it means to run with the land?
Is the town facing any potential liability if, even with these things running with the land, if the new owners, disregard the monitoring plan or don't pay for the final installments of the monitoring plan?
So the agreement, like the release and stuff, doesn't necessarily prevent the Army Corps from further coming after, the town. But it has the indemnity. So if, anything ever came up with the Army Corps in the future, the Silverton Lakes would be required to defend the town in those circumstances.
Whether or not they're still the owner?
Well, it would be, depending on the agreement, it would, if it's running with the land, then it would be whoever is that owner of that property would be the defender. So it would no longer be personal to Silverton Lakes at that point. But I think what you're raising is a issue because an indemnity is only as good as the entity that, is indemnifying you. So if you don't have a strong entity indemnifying you, then it won't have a tremendous amount of value. And that's why some of these other ones have insurance requirements. And if they're maintaining their insurance, then that is where, what makes the indemnity stronger.
Would it be appropriate to ask the owners of Silverton Lakes to guarantee the obligations related to the monitoring and remediation in the event that some other less amicable party were to buy it from them?
So I believe you're suggesting make it personal then and make sure that they are insuring. Is that what you're suggesting?
A guarantee of the Silverton Lakes obligations until the mitigation and monitoring plan is completed, because there's nothing preventing them from selling this, 2 days after the streets and alleys are vacated at some type of profit. And then, we would have a new party that didn't have all this context and wasn't working with the town, that we'd have to try and get to work with the Army Corps. And then if they don't, the Army Corps is going to look to the town if that other new party isn't responsive or doing something wrong. And I know that this is just a hypothetical, but it seems like it's not, it doesn't seem like it's asking Silverton Lakes to do something they aren't already willing to do. And we're just protecting ourselves in the eventuality that they sell the property in the near future. Trustee Harper?
I feel like we've had this discussion before, and I think we're again starting to go down this dirt road. We've had these discussions. What are we doing now?
I don't think we've had this discussion ever before.
Have you gleaned something that we haven't seen about new potential buyers and them selling?
Not at all.
These are
I think
hypotheticals. These are hypotheticals.
Right. And that's how
Correct?
legal documents are drafted, by considering all the different potential outcomes. And now that we have a pretty wide array of
Mr. Mayor,
nearly
I am
complete
very,
documents.
I'm very well versed in how legal documentation works. Thank you. But
Okay,
what
well
I'm
then your question was
saying
rhetorical.
is we're going down
So
a
this
rabbit
is
hole. We're going down a rabbit hole once again, Mr. Mayor.
You're frozen. But not at all. I think that that's a pretty valid concern of like what happens in the future. And we're looking at all the different holes now that we have the full set of documents in front of us. And I welcome any questions like that. And I think if we don't do that, we're not doing our diligence. Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor. I completely agree with your line of reasoning there that you're looking at items that could potentially affect the liability that the town holds on these pieces of property. We've already been put in a bad situation once. It definitely makes sense to make this as tight as we can so that the town does not have future liability and doesn't have future poor dealings with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Trustee Barilla.
So we've already assumed future liability because we're taking over the section of the wetland that the Heinbaus were going to keep if we vacated everything below Campground Road anyway. So we have full liability as soon as this goes into effect for anything that transpires in that section of wetland that the town of Silverton will now own. So what about somebody driving a truck through there in a year? That would not be the responsibility of the Heinbaus. That's the responsibility of the town because now we own the wetlands. What if the EPA decides to come in and say something came off the Lackawanna? We, as the town of Silverton, now hold that liability in itself. So are we forgetting all these other scenarios that we've already talked about? If it's tied to the land, when it's sold, that means it stays with the land. So the people purchasing it would have to know about it because it's tied to the land. I don't see the logic and the reasoning behind talking about this all again. We were to the point we're at a second reading. We should be moving forward through these documents with some expediency because we've had all time to review them.
I feel like you guys are all trying to rush the process, and that if anyone has valid questions here, now's the time to ask them. This is a public hearing and we're going to open up to the public, and they might even raise new issues that we haven't thought about. And for clarification, everyone, the land that the town will be owning, yes, we would have liability with respect to damage to those wetlands, but what about the wetlands that the Heinbaus are taking responsibility for? And that's the specific land that we're talking about. If Cottonwood doesn't get paid, they're not going to keep doing the monitoring. And we're relying on a private party that potentially isn't going to be the Heinbaus forever to complete that plan. Attorney Kosnick.
Thank you. So I was just looking again at the last document that's part of the conversation relator. It's the release and indemnification. And I was just seeing how broad we had defined in there the indemnification and release. And so this one portion of the indemnification, the release would be personal to Silverton Lakes. And at the top of page 2 there, we have the obligations of Silverton Lakes. And they're indemnifying the town for essentially any claims that are arising under the mitigation and monitoring plan. So that would include claims by the Army Corps that they did not, accomplish their phase 1 objectives. And unless we have in there that, if it's due to the town's negligence, then the indemnification doesn't apply. But otherwise, it would be Silverton Lakes' duty to indemnify. I mean, you brought up good points before, Mayor, in that the indemnification still is only as good as the entity itself. So if we're talking about a transfer to a different owner before the end of the mitigation or monitoring plan, some of these other documents might apply with it running with the land, but as far as Silverton Lakes, it might no longer be an entity, and the insurance might not no longer apply. So I mean, there are some risks there, and the only way to kind of get around that is through maybe possibly posting, you know, a lengthy bond or something where you know, that would secure their performance.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Heinbaugh is on the line and would like to speak if that's okay with you and the board. And two, I might ask him, many times the Army Corps will require a financial bond to guarantee performance of mitigation work. I don't know specifically if the Heinbaughs have been requested to do that, but maybe they could expand.
Attorney Koznick, for the process of a public hearing, do we do discussion, then we go to public comment, or what's our process here?
You kind of have flexibility here, Mayor. You know, if you want to open up, if you want to just let the board discuss it more, and then have, you know, some period where Mr. Heinbaugh could talk about it, is kind of up to you on how you want to proceed. It's just the only strict requirement is that the public has the right to comment.
Okay, I'd like to complete trustee discussion so that Mr. Heinbaugh can hear all of our questions, comments, and concerns, and then he can address them all at once rather than having potentially lengthy back and forth. Any other comments, or was that it? Mayor Pro Tem?
Are you asking about any other comments on this subject or any other comments in general?
In general, before we move to whatever the next stage is, which I suppose would be public discussion.
I guess my comment is that maybe just less specific potentially. Here's my specific comment. I was looking through the documents trying to look for, I think some feedback that we had given or direction in the last meeting was not just indemnity for the future damaging of wetlands, but for the prior damage of the wetlands. I didn't see that added.
Attorney Koznick.
That's a good question, and I believe that was brought into the release indemnification agreement, the kind of the last agreement that's part of the packet there. And so that includes all known and unknown claims that may exist at this time. So if there's anything that is unknown or hasn't been brought forward, it's essentially there's an indemnity and release toward the town based on that.
Okay. Okay, so that's strong enough to cover that there.
Correct.
Okay, great. And I guess I don't want to delay this process really necessarily, but I do want to take a minute to just reflect on it and be thorough. And Trustee Harper, I hear your point of not wanting to go down rabbit holes, and I don't consider them rabbit holes. I was wondering, yeah, I'm thinking about the whereas portion of the ordinance. And I guess I want to make a statement that I'm concerned that the trustees are in a position right now where we're going through this process and potentially setting a precedent for future processes that could potentially unfold in this way. And I'd like to just indicate that I'm not comfortable with the way this feels, and it doesn't, I don't think anyone is comfortable. It doesn't sound like any trustee has felt like this is exactly how this should go when we have situations like this, whether it's the damaging of wetlands or how the town responds to that liability or how we handle private business owners on this subject. So I want to state that I am uncomfortable with this process, and I'm wondering if there's, I actually just jotted some notes down, a whereas in the ordinance that potentially addresses something like Whereas in the future, another individual or a business finds themselves in a position in which they may benefit from the vacation of town property, this case does not set a precedent for that action to occur. That's one of my statements about this. I'm also sort of, I'm trying to figure out if this thinking is in line with Mayor Furman's. I'm not sure if it is or not, but something in the whereas where Silverton Lakes decides to sell their property and then the subsequent owners, or they potentially refuse to complete the mitigation process, that the responsibility for that mitigation and care will remain with the owners of the property and not fall back on the town. And again, I apologize if I'm unclear about whether that's exactly what Mayor Furman refers to, but I am looking at this from the perspective of the town and working towards making sure that our contracts reflect the discussions that we've either had or not had, and that they're strong enough so that this collective knowledge and experience of this Board of Trustees is clear to any future boards and to the implementation and enforcement of the contract as it looks on paper, so that someone without all of the background knowledge and all of the history and all of the conversation can track and understand how we and why we got to this sort of imperfect point.
Thank you. Attorney Kosnick or Administrator Ryder, any feedback on Sally's notes?
I would add, I think precedent seems to be a concern about a lot of board members, and understanding the perspective that everybody, you want to make this clear that it is not going to set a precedent. This is an ordinance that is considered through public process and stuff, and it's, you know, unique to what is being proposed here. So it wouldn't set any kind of legal precedent. The one thing you have to be careful with the whereas is you also can't bind, you know, future boards with what you're doing now. So by saying, hey, you can't do this, or this isn't, you know, right for you to do in the future, that would be more kind of giving direction to future boards, which is something you also have to be careful with. So I think it's precedence is a valid concern. However, each one of these would be considered separately as a unique proposal from an applicant.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Kosnick. I think really, and I should have maybe clarified, I'm not referring to legal precedent, but more of just like, well, when we remember how we handled it with Silverton Lakes, it seemed okay for the town to vacate streets and alleys back then. Why don't we consider it again in this situation? I just want to be really public and really transparent that it's an uncomfortable position as a town trustee to be vacating town property.
Trustee Barella.
So to Sally's point, we've had lengthy discussions. We've gone through everything. We've done circular conversations. We've had so many meetings about this that I can't even decipher each one of them separately in my head right now because they all run together. So have we discussed all of these issues? Yes. Are we going to have to look at everything in the future on a case-by-case basis in reference to anything that requires abandonment of streets and right-of-ways? 100%. That's why we do the process that we do. That is why we have the meetings prior, the first reading, the second reading, the public comment, because that's what our job is to do. Even if it's uncomfortable, we are here to make decisions. And that is what the town of Silverton, local constituents have entrusted us to do. So we have gone round and round on this issue so much that we should be in the, like I said before, we're in the second reading. Okay. If all these things were so much on the forefront of your mind, why weren't they in the last discussion or the previous one or the previous one or the previous one? I know this is the process, as Mayor Shane likes to continually point out, but we've almost beaten this horse to death. I feel that we have come to not always the best decisions, but we've come to decisions. And once we vote, I am okay. If I say yes, then that's my vote. If you say no, then that's your vote. You don't always have to agree and have 100% of a vote to say yes. You're allowed to say no because it violates your conscience. But we have a job to do, which is to vote and to create the best possible outcome for the town of Silverton.
Thank you. Looks like we just lost somebody. No, just video. To that end, I'd like to add to Mayor Pro Tem Barney's comment that it doesn't sound like she's attempting to postpone or further discuss, but I do think the idea of documenting context could have expedited this issue a huge amount. And the suggestion, if I heard it correctly, that she just made was to include in the whereases some additional context so that a future board wouldn't need to have dozens of conversations on these issues, because it would be clear from the whereas clauses what exactly this was about and why these decisions were made. If we have additional discussion, comments, or questions on the other documents, does that happen after this ordinance is discussed with the public, or do we all do all of that now, Attorney Kosnick?
That would occur afterwards. I was just requesting that the board not ignore those in the context of this discussion.
Great.
But you would have
Right.
each one of those would be a separate item.
All right, so noting that we will have further discussion on each of the related documents here. Unless there's further trustee discussion, we'll move to public comment. Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor. Just kind of reflecting on this process as well, I feel very similar to the way that Mayor Pro Tem Barney feels. I think a lot of the discussion in vacating this public land kind of revolved around us looking to precedent in the past of what happened at the Y with the town vacating land at the Y. I do think that we considered them very separately, that the situation at the Y was very different from what we were experiencing here. So I think that you should take some comfort in thinking that, you know, just because we vacated some land somewhere else does not mean that we took this lightly and came to the same conclusions or used that experience or precedent to craft our decision that we're at today. So I think you could take some solace in that. I am still concerned, and I still feel like we were having the conversation is how, as a town, we can mitigate risk and liability for future wetlands damage, or if this wetlands mitigation is not completed. And I don't think that we heard really strong discussion or support from our attorney or the board members as to, is there any kind of way that we can kind of tighten this up a little bit so that we have a little bit to lean back on there. And maybe that it comes with Mr. Heinbaugh's comment as well. I don't know.
Attorney Kosnick.
And so I'd be happy to add what I can to that conversation. And I'll try not to repeat what I said previously, but the release indemnification would still put Silverton Lakes RV Resort LLC on essentially the hook for completing. They're really going to be responsible for the work above, you know, the restoration of that phase 1 area above Campground Road there. And as John was alluding to, and what Mr. Heinbaugh could probably speak to, is also the bond that's going to be in place that ensures, you know, that work is going to be complete in there. So, you know, when you try to weigh the risk with that not being completed, you have the bond that's in place in favor of the Army Corps, and you have them indemnifying the town for if they don't complete that work. Those are the main protections that would be in place at this point. And I guess the only other concern I've heard is, hey, if this is sold to, you know, another entity and they don't complete the work, I believe the bond will still be in place, so that won't be an issue. This indemnification that's specific to the release is personal. If the business is transferred, then it would go to the new business, so they'd also be on the hook here too. So it depends on how the transaction. I think the only main concern that I could think of is if they sell the property, the bond is not enough to complete the work, and the new entity itself only buys the land and not the business. So that's where I could see that there's a hole right now. Did that make sense? That's a lot of words, sorry.
No, thank you, Paul. That's very helpful.
All right, opening this to public comment. I see Mr. Heimbaugh's with his hand up. Mr. Heimbaugh, I am giving you talking permission. The floor is now yours once you unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I could have saved a lot of this discussion because we've already got a deal with the Corps of Engineers for nearly $50,000 that's set aside for this. And the land that's in question that we're doing this replanting of has nothing to do with the town because it's my land. It's above the campground road. And well, when you vacate the streets and alleys, then it would be all my responsibility. It had nothing, even if I didn't go through with this, it would be nothing would come back on the town because it's not your land. The rest of the stuff on the other side, nothing gets done with that. The only thing that can go wrong there is if somebody comes in here and starts building a house on it or starts moving dirt without the Corps' permission. But as far as the mediation that we're doing right now, once the streets and alleys are turned over to us and we own the land, then the town has nothing to do with that, even if I don't finish it. But I've already set aside nearly $50,000. We've already been working on it for 2 years. And we're having a really good success of getting stuff to grow. And I've hired a firm, Cottonwood Consulting, to do all this work. So I think I've shown that we're willing to do it. And I don't see where the town has any liability at all once this deal is done with that land that the Corps of Engineers is making us redo. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Attorney Kosnick, if you could clarify, I think the issue is that the initial event occurred that created the liability among the town and Mr. Heimbaugh. And so if the remediation was not completed, even though the town no longer owns the land, the Army Corps could still look to both original parties that were privy to that damage. And so even though we wouldn't have any responsibility for new damage, I think that if this were not completed and if the bond were insufficient, the Army Corps might still come back to Silverton, the town of Silverton, to look for fulfilling the obligations.
Mayor, I think that's generally correct. The one thing that I'm not sure about off the top of my head is through all of these obligations arise from the mitigation and monitoring plan. And once that's adopted, it says Silverton Lakes is obligated for this phase 1 restoration. And whether the Army Corps can come back and say, okay, although Silverton Lakes did not complete this and the bond is not sufficient, or letter of credit, whatever Mr. Heimbaugh has to secure the work, I think it's hypothetically there is some liability there, but you know, Mr. Heimbaugh could be correct that it is zero, but I would, to be safe, say there is still some potential here that if the work isn't completed, the Army Corps could still find some way to bring the town back in.
Thank you. So without seeing any additional members of the public looking to comment, And unless Mr. Heimbaugh has additional feedback he'd like to provide, it seems that we've completed the public hearing and second reading process. At which point do we choose to take any action with respect to my comment or Mayor Pro Tem's comment, or do we simply vote to approve the ordinance as is? And that's directed at Attorney Koznick as a question. I see Trustee Lashley has his hand up as well.
Sorry, Mayor, is the question what would be potential next action for the board?
Yes.
So the board can have conversation and make a motion regarding the ordinance. You could have further conversation regarding the other documents as well, just for clarification, if that helps you with your decision here. So it's kind of up to the board which direction you want to head.
Trustee Lashley?
I just have one other question as a clarification here as well. I know we had a brief discussion as far as some of these coordinates for right-of-ways and easements on here, but I was wondering if we have something that I'm kind of generally missing here that says regarding the width of the trail easement.
Administrator Ryder can
We do, Trustee Lashley. I believe it's 15 feet, but I'm.
Yeah, I'm looking for that. It looks like.
And just a clarification too, for mostly for Administrator Ryder, as far as a 15-foot easement, have you had any discussions with John Seitz regarding kind of that being sufficient if they needed to do any trail building or anything of the sort in there?
I haven't had any specifically with Mr. Seitz. I've built a number of these trails myself down at Purgatory and believe 15 to be adequate, more than adequate. Your typical, concrete level trail would be maybe 8 to 10 feet. So then you'd have another couple feet on either side. Outside of that, that's a pretty big sidewalk at that point, 10 feet in width.
Okay, that sounds pretty sufficient to me then as well.
Trustee Harper?
Trustee Lashley, thank you, Mayor. Trustee Lashley, it's page 26 of our packet. Article number 2, labeled trail easement. It does state 15 foot.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Harper.
All right, my last question, which I did ask before, and either I'm just forgetful or I didn't see. In the event that we approve this ordinance tonight, and then something happens in connection with one of the provisions of the related documents where we don't come to terms on the lease or something else, does this ordinance, I just see that it goes into effect 30 days after we approve it. What's our protection in the event that the last few points in negotiation fall apart and we've now adopted this ordinance that vacates the streets and alleys pursuant to section 3?
That's a good question, Mayor, and that was on my mind too. And so, if there are some significant items that might be on your guys' list for the other documents, you can continue this conversation to the end and kind of go through those other documents right now if that pleases you, to make sure that there's nothing huge out there, because once you approve it, it's approved.
And so there's no way, like what I asked last time, to make the effectiveness contingent on the other documents being entered into.
Yeah, we did it the other way. So the other documents are contingent on this one. And so that's.
So then I don't think we can vote on this until we're good with all the other documents. Unless we flip the process. If you'd like to make this contingent on the other documents, then we can go ahead and vote on this right now. Otherwise, I think we have to get through the other issues.
Yeah, I suggest you go through the other documents, make sure you're comfortable with those, and then they're placed in a certain order though on your agenda to be considered in that way. So I would suggest maybe going through these different items and then taking the vote in the order that's on your agenda.
Okay. So going through the related documents now, did anyone have any comments or questions on the quitclaim deed?
Mayor, would you like me to just kind of go through any of the changes that since the last meeting? I know there's red lines that are out there. I don't know how helpful it would be for the public or for you guys to have me go through it. I don't want to waste anybody's time if it's not helpful.
I would say if there are any that you think were particularly significant changes, then we should go through those. But otherwise, I don't think you need to note each of the minor changes. Trustee Harper?
I was just going to suggest, Mr. Mayor, that for everyone's comfortability, if we read through this, that'd be great. But if you think no, then let's not do it.
Read through which? The list of changes?
Yep.
Sure. All right. Attorney Kosnick, have at it.
Okay. For the quitclaim deed, there was some typos just in the legal description, so that was changed since the last meeting. Also, in the description itself, Mr. Heimbaugh, previously there was a portion of block 11 there, kind of all the way at the bottom. And in the last iteration of this, it only identified the east quarter of that south half of the block that was going to be transferred to the town. Now it's a little bigger. It's going to be the east half of the south half of that block 11. So that's all the way at the bottom there. So it's actually another quarter of a half of a block that the town would be receiving. And then just that last paragraph in the quitclaim deed was added throughout all of these documents, which makes it contingent on the ultimate approval of the ordinance.
Thank you. I noticed I had 3 comments to the documents in total, but I'll hit them as we hit the specific documents, and all 3 are a continuation of the comments I noted during the first reading. So not for anyone who might be critical, there are no new comments this evening. So campground road and trail easement. Anyone other than myself have a comment? Great, I'll jump right in. In section 3, we talked about at the last reading revising the OHV provision that says they'll have the perpetual right to use campground road easement for the use of OHVs. We talked about distinguishing campground road as a public road that would be subject to all other ordinances in Silverton and not a private road. And so saying that OHVs will be allowed in perpetuity, I think suggests more of the private than public. And so I had asked for a revision to say that campground road will be subject to all other ordinances and rules adopted by the town of Silverton. Trustee Barella?
I wasn't aware that you had a lot of support for that. You said it, but who else said that it had to happen?
Well, nobody had a issue with that comment when I made it at the last meeting.
Well, I assumed that there was going to be discussion, and when you didn't get support, that it didn't go anywhere.
My understanding of that discussion was it was a discussion, and if anyone had an issue with the comments I was making, they needed to voice the issue. So let's have that conversation now. Who has an opinion about this particular sentence that would otherwise allow OHVs into perpetuity? Trustee Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a quick question with regards to that topic. I'm leaning towards where Trustee Barilla is going with this. However, why don't we bring Mr. Heimbaugh into that absolute discussion?
In what respect?
Let him weigh in on it.
Would we usually let a member of the public weigh in on how we're going to treat a public road? Is that an appropriate thing for us to do? I'm open to what the board would like, but that seems out of the normal process.
Aren't we getting discussion?
On the ordinance. Trustee Barella?
I wasn't aware that this was a public road. We are just getting, come on, John, what's our right? We're getting the rights to, I can't even think of the word right now.
We're getting an access
It's an
easement.
easement.
An access
It's an
easement, thank you. So when did this change to become a road? So that means we need to do all the road improvements? Well, you can't because you've got a wetland on either side of it as delineated in our documentation. So if we're going to treat this as a road, then we need to have everything else done in there as a road. And it's never been done that way because it's always been a private access.
Well, I'm very glad you're voicing these issues because that was the opposite of my understanding from the last meeting, that this was intended to be treated like a public road. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. Mayor Pro Tem Barney?
I think the town is, it's an easement and it's an access road, but the town is responsible for maintaining it. And I think I'm not clear on why we wouldn't include that road in whatever rules and regulations that we include other roads. And maybe I'm just missing the reasoning or the thought process there, but I'm unclear about why we wouldn't consider it the way we consider other roads in Silverton and what makes that one different, especially if the town is responsible for maintaining it.
Trustee Lashley?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Furman. I know that early on this discussion, we did have pretty big reservations and concerns about continuing OHV usage, but we didn't really discuss this a whole lot in some of our last meetings. I'm not opposed to allowing OHVs on this road. I think that if we are going to be responsible for maintaining it, that might become an issue down the road. I know it certainly is at the county level right now for maintenance of roads that OHVs use. I'm wondering if anybody asked our public works director, John Seitz, about this again. And then, yeah, I just wonder what would happen if something were to change on the county level. What that would do for Mr. Heinbaugh and the OHVs on that road.
Trustee Harper?
This is a question for our attorney and our town administrator. Is the campground road currently on our OHV route?
Officially, I do not believe it is because it's a private road.
Exactly. And we're getting an easement onto this private road. Shouldn't the existing use of this road be grandfathered in with what we're doing here?
So I didn't want to make this about OHVs. That from my perspective, this isn't an OHV issue. This is the perception of this being a private road or a public road. And my understanding through this negotiation was that this road was going to be treated like a public road, that the easement is intended to create all of the same structures in place for the public use of that road, which would include having that road be subject to all of the town ordinances. And maybe that's not how it's happening today, but that doesn't mean that that's right.
If what you're saying is true, that this road is, if we go through this easement process and this road is now subject, what we would essentially be doing is removing 3/4 of the Heinbaugh's business by not allowing OHVs out there.
I'm not saying we're not allowing OHVs. As long as they're allowed in town, they're allowed on the road. I'm just saying this road should be subject to the same rules as other roads in town. I mean, does that mean that, does this road allow for open containers? Is this still private property? I mean, where do we draw the line in terms of enforcement? Can you speed on the road? Is there any speed limit for those 2 or 3 blocks? Or does that still apply? Like, I think that there's a lot of public safety issues that come with that being perceived as private property rather than public property. Attorney
Please,
Cosmic.
Paul, speak.
All right, so just to clarify, arguably right now, it's a private road. Once it's dedicated, or once the easement's dedicated here to the town, it will become a public road. In my understanding, and John could clarify on this point, but that it has been maintained by the town in the past as well, and that the snow plowing occurs on there. The town has been doing that as well, even though it arguably has been considered a private road.
Confirmed. That's historically what has happened.
So that seems to go in favor of aligning this provision with town ordinances. Trustee Harper?
So meaning nothing will change on how this thoroughfare has been ruled and regulated and conducted since 1972, correct?
Unless other things change in town, but it would mean that our 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, unless otherwise posted, was applicable. It would mean that you can't walk around with open containers. It would mean that you have to have a driver's license to be operating a motor vehicle on the property. Like, there's a whole slew of things that come with it not being private property. And that was my point, not whether OHVs are permitted or not. Trustee Brella.
Well, then where's the implementation of the sidewalks that need to be there on either side? There's a lot of things that can't happen. When was the last time you were on that road? It's got a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit already imposed on it. There are a lot of things that cannot be done based on the way that the delineation of the wetland is on either side of the road. So are we actually talking? What are we discussing right here? Because we've just jumped from OHVs to who gets the road and what are we going to do with it? So what discussion are we having at the moment? Are we grandfathering in the OHV use because it's not on the route, because it's always historically been a private road access? Or are we going to say that we need to start making everything about this road the same width as everything else in the town specified for roadways? Let's look that up. So let's see this. So it'd have to be 100 feet wide, depending. What discussion are we really having here? Please inform me, because we're just bouncing around in circles again.
The discussion we're having is not granting a perpetual right to use this public easement for OHVs, and to say that where the rest of the provision reads that this will be subject to the general public ordinances. It's not a.
So I'm in favor of the way it's written.
All right, would we like to go person to person?
It might help if I put this part of the negotiation in context. It was originally brought up by the Heinbaus. First of all, they had a lease that required this road be publicly accessed, or we had the right to terminate the lease with 90 days notice. So it was always intended, and it has been used de facto as a private road forever. The Heinbaus brought up that, gosh, if town did go a different direction with OHVs at some point in the future and disallowed OHVs on public roads, he'd like to maintain the right to have internal use of OHVs up and down Campground Road, just simply so campers can get from one end to the other. So we initially had proposed a provision that said, so long as they're operating as a campground, then OHVs would be allowed internally, privately. They are allowed in other campgrounds. So that was the genesis of this. Where we've arrived today is now this issue of trying to marry a full-blown town public roads provisions, ordinances, control, etc., layering it onto this campground road. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but the original idea was just if they could preserve internal use of OHVs, should the town not allow them elsewhere in town. So if town isn't allowing them anywhere else, you'd have to get comfortable with them still being able to use them internal to their property.
Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor. With our discussion in the previous board, the majority of board members did give direction that, just as you said, Shane, that this should, if it's going to be treated as a public road, should be subject to the same rules and regulations as every other public road in town, including OHV usage.
So
that was brought up as part of the negotiation or wasn't really discussed thoroughly with Mr. Heinbaugh is, at this point now, maybe it's almost too late, but it's not too late yet.
So I don't have any other points to make here. Why don't we just quickly do a round robin of leave the same or update, so that we have a sense of where we're at. Mayor Pro Tem.
It should be treated like a public road.
Trustee Wiegert.
I like the document as written and presented tonight.
Trustee Harper.
I agree with Trustee Wiegert. I like the document as it's written.
Trustee Bierma.
I'm a little torn. I think if we're going to treat it as a public road, I think it needs to be treated like one. But if it's, I don't know, I feel like if we're going to treat it as a private road with public access, I feel like there needs to be some sort of maintenance that's taken off our hands.
So that's a no but or a yes and.
Yeah.
So are you kind of you're going in the middle on this one? You're saying leave it the same, but require them to cover Silverton Lakes to cover maintenance, and the town no longer has responsibility, or update. Is that where you're at?
That would be where I stand right now.
Trustee Lashley.
I'm in support of treating it as a public road, but I'm not willing to see this entire agreement fall apart based on this small issue. So if that is any clarification.
Yeah, I didn't expect this to be quite so controversial. Trustee Barella.
I'm in favor of leaving it as it's written.
All right, so we're 3-3 with Jordan in the middle. Trustee Harper.
I would ask that we have one additional discussion with maybe a little addendum attached to this, stating that portions, if not all, of the current uses of this road be left as is and grandfathered in. Because if we're leaving it up and they're unable to run any sort of OHVs on this public-private road, you're going to put them out of business.
I don't see that as the case.
Do you not?
No. Why would they go out of business if in some future state the town decides not to have OHVs and they're staging things and everywhere else? You think Silverton Lake's going to go out of business because they can't drive down Campground Road? They can still drive internally on each section. It's still private property above Campground Road.
How do they get across the road then?
Why do they need to get across the road? Why is that a deal killer? I mean, this isn't our role to discuss what the pros and cons of Silverton Lake's business is, but
you made it so.
Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the town's responsibility for something that will be perceived as a public road. Attorney Kosnick.
Sorry, I was muted. My suggestion, whatever the board decides here, you do want Mr. Heinbaugh's input for the same reason you're discussing this before the ordinance. If he says, hey, no, I'm not going to sign that, then you're going to be in an awkward position then. So I think before you make any, and you go back to your ordinance, you get Mr. Heinbaugh's input.
Mr. Heinbaugh, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, number one, I've got three entrances to my campground. One right at the corner, one up about 100 yards, and then their main entrance up another couple hundred yards. So I've got three entrances I got to get on on Campground Road. And I use OHVs for my work vehicles, just like the fire department has one for theirs, okay? Not only that, I have, my campground is on both sides of the road. So I have to get on Campground Road to get to both of my places. So, you know, shutting down this road to me, you know, I need it from the corner. I use every bit of that road. Every bit of it. I have 3 entrances on that road. Actually, I've got 5 entrances on that road. 2 on one side, 3 on the other. So you'd basically be putting me out to dry.
So clarifying, we're not shutting anything down today. We're just having a discussion around unintended consequences. If the town makes decisions in the future, we should all be bound by them. And there shouldn't be a bunch of exceptions, is the point that I made.
Well, that's the exception I need. I need to be able to use OHVs on that road.
Trustee Lashley, sorry, Mr. Heimbach, go ahead.
Yeah, if the town shuts down the roads in town, so be it. But at least don't shut down my operation out there. Don't shut it. If you shut that road down, I can't get across the road. I can't go down the road. I have to, like I said, I've got 5 entrances there. So, you know, I would be breaking the law every time I got on that road. And you know what?
And wouldn't a reasonable alternative being selling the OHVs and driving a truck?
You don't
Just
understand.
offering.
Maybe you should come out, Mr. Mayor, and spend about an hour with me and let me show you the campground. I don't think you've ever seen it before. And
I walk down Campground Road a few times a week.
Anyway, if I was running big trucks all over that campground, helping park people, I take people downtown to my other campground. If I was doing that in big trucks, we'd have nothing but a dust bowl out there. But I'm using OHVs with little dump trailers on them with like golf cart type tires that don't put a lot of PSI pressure on the ground. I wouldn't want to do that with, and I have as many as 3 or 4 of them going at one time. We house, I don't know if you know it or not, we house about 300 to 400 people a night out here. We're very busy, and we use these OHVs to get to messages, to take care of emergencies, to park people, to do everything. So I just invite you to come out, see my operation. The whole board can come out, see my operation and see how it works. And then you'll understand what I'm talking about. That's all I have.
Thank you. Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually find that argument fairly compelling as far as an operation standpoint for Mr. Heimbach's operation out there. The same way that a lot of kind of civic municipalities use those kind of OHVs to maintain river trails and all kinds of other things. I can absolutely see why you'd prefer to use one of those vehicles versus a full-size pickup. Just saying.
Thank you.
All right, point dropped. Let's move along. You guys are gonna love my other comment. In the lease, we talked about including, and this I know we didn't decide on, but we talked about including a material amount in the lease. The context here, in my view, is the town's giving up something immensely valuable to cover some short-term, relatively small liability. And although the leased property itself is not terribly meaningful, this would be, I think, a very logical place to include a dollar amount for the town to get some remuneration for granting a significant amount of value to a private property owner. Something that I know many community members have voiced opposition to, but we're planning to do this evening. So that I find the $10 lease amount to be a little unfortunate, and I'd like that to be something more like $10,000 a year, $1,000 a month, something like that. That if they have 300 or 400 people a day, it's really not that meaningful relative to the amount of value that vacating these streets and alleys provides. Trustee Harper?
I believe the campground, like hotels, they pay a lodging tax on each site.
Yes.
I think they pay their fair share, just like I do, just like you do. Are you suggesting that they pay more?
Yes, because you or I don't have acres of streets and alleys vacated to us, as well as a bunch of additional land leased for a nominal amount since 1971 that the town isn't seeing value from. Trustee Varela?
They don't pay a fair share in taxes?
Yeah, I'm curious once again on this line of reasoning, because this was brought up last time, and the $10 nominal fee is way more than the $1 a year that they were getting before. So I'm still wondering where you think $10,000 from $1 a year is actually worth discussing.
Trustee Varela, I'd appreciate if you could keep your composure throughout this discussion. I found the last couple comments to be a little over the line.
We have every right to speak however we want, when we want.
I disagree. We've had a conversation about maintaining professionalism and speaking to each other with respect.
Again. How many times have we been in discussion over this? Mr. Kosnick, how much is that of an increase, Mr. Ryder? It's not that much comparatively for a 99-year lease for $1 a year. So let's put that into perspective. You're the only one last time that thought it should be $10,000. You're the one last time that thought that Lisa Merrill was buying all this property for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's not. So where is the value in the wetlands? Where? Because I'm still trying to figure it out, and I'm allowed to speak how I'd like to.
Trustee Varela, you're out of line. Trustee Lashley?
Thank you, Mayor Furman. Maybe now is a great time then to bring up the discussion of whether Trustee Varela is able to participate in this discussion.
Trustee Lashley, I also think that that's an inappropriate thing right here. Let's keep it focused on this one thing, and that's another issue to be discussed in its own time.
As far as your comment, I still have, voiced on here as well that this is a pretty valuable stake of land. I know that Trustee Varela, every time we have a discussion, does not agree that we should have any kind of discussion about this, but I'm still thinking that this is probably around 40 lots that are valuable lots that are not considered wetlands in this agreement. And I don't think that asking for a lease is an unreasonable, with some value to it, is an unreasonable ask of the town.
Trustee Birma and then Mayor Pro Tem Barney.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think $1 or $10 is way too little. I'm in no way an assessor, so I don't want to put a price tag on anything, but there is value in it, and it's definitely more than $10.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm a little disappointed in the willingness that I notice in our discussions that to make decisions that do not appear to be in the best interest of the town. And I don't have any skin in this game. This is not a personal win or lose battle for me. I want this to work for all of the parties involved. I think we've worked really hard, not necessarily going around and around, but to actually take a complex situation and work out a solution. And we've put a lot of effort into thinking about it. And as a representative of the interest of the town, there is no way that I can support making decisions that I think don't reflect the best interest of the town. I think $10 a year of a lease. It's not an isolated, I don't see this decision as an isolated one, just kind of like the same as the OHV isn't isolated. It's linked and connected with other issues that are involved in this entire discussion. And it's linked to the value of the property that the town loses when it vacates streets and alleys, and it's linked to the value that it adds to the business owner who's going to operate it at a for-profit, in a for-profit model, does not support Silverton nonprofit, something like MSI, where, we might want to make that kind of consideration. But I'm really thinking about this from the perspective of how does the town benefit from the decision that it makes tonight? And I'm with Trustee Lashley. I don't want to derail this process. It's so far down the road, and the discussions that we've had have been incredibly valuable, even when they've seemed like rabbit holes. I think they matter. They're part of transparency, and they get us to where we are. And anything short of making a decision in the best interest of the town is just unacceptable to me.
Trustee Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pro Tem Barney, what do you suggest as a dollar amount?
I agree with Trustee Bierma that I'm not an assessor, but I think $10,000 a year sounds fair to me. You used the word fair share, and it's hard to determine fair, but we are giving away, a lot of land for for-profit use.
I agree with you that we are exchanging land for-profit use, and this for-profit business pays into our tax base, and they pay greatly into our tax base, both in property taxes and lodging fees, hence the amount of camp spots that they have. I was just curious. I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything like that. I was just trying to be curious to see if you had a dollar amount in mind. That was it.
Yeah, I'm trying to apply the type of thinking to this scenario that is in the interest of the long-term prosperity of the town.
So far we've got 4 people who have voiced an interest in this being not a nominal dollar amount. Trustee Harper and Administrator Ryder.
I was just gonna point out John Ryder.
I think in this part of the discussion, we need to be careful that we're not just picking out the lease and its payment as the only deal point. Town is getting value. It's getting value through the savings of wetland mitigation costs, value in terms of a very important access easement over Campground Road. It's no longer tied to a weird lease. We're getting a blanket easement for a river trail that, could avoid having to negotiate with private interests in the future, which would be of great value. To the extent this property value goes up, we'll earn property taxes off it. We've already talked about the strong business that's currently being run that generates lodging. So this is a negotiation that had probably 15 important variables to it, and the lease was one of them. I find it difficult to put a value on it. What we're really seemingly trying to do here is guess at what we think the value of the land is going to increase if it does, by giving away the right of way, balancing that against the things we already have in the negotiation, having a makeup amount here to allow us to get over the finish line. So I always just want to point out that there is value to town in this deal. And we have to assess that in totality versus just looking at the lease.
Administrator Ryder, I'm a little surprised. Like you're in the position where I think you should be advocating the most zealously for town, and you're looking at a $370,000 budget deficit, and it seems like we should be looking at every opportunity to put the town on better footing. And this deal does not do that. And this seems like a good place where we could be advocating for some additional benefit for the town. And so I'm surprised why, by your kind of suggestion that we already have value and maybe we should drop this point.
Either way, just pointing out that the town in fact was deriving value from the deal as is. I also look at the downside risk. If this deal comes apart and ultimately we go our separate ways in the mitigation, then there is no value to the town, only cost.
But we maintain many acres of land.
That we're going to
I guess Mr. Heimbach has his hand up. We can find out if this is a deal breaker right now. Mr. Heimbach?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
These, I've donated about $15,000 to this town in the last 4 years, and a lot of my time. And we are trading land too. You're getting some good land also. So I think this is just a jab. You know what? I'd rather donate $10,000 to a worthy cause, and I've already done that. But this is absurd to me. Absurd. You find somebody that needs some help this winter, call me. I'll help them. But I think this is just absurd that you want to charge me $10,000 when we're trading land. We're both getting value here. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. I saw Mayor Pro Tem's hand and Trustee Lashley's hand.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Heimbach. I do recognize that this discussion can be perceived or understood as a jab, and I certainly do not mean to jab at you personally. I think just taking this, and I don't know you personally either, so I'm sorry about that. It would be nice to actually know you since we are so intimate in this conversation, but I failed to sort of perceive that could be taken personally. I really am trying to I'm really trying to advocate for the establishing of a habit on the part of the town trustees where we view our interests as valuable. And I don't mean to be practicing this habit on your personal business, but we do have we shouldn't need to have conflicting, goals and end outcomes here. We all want Silverton to succeed, and we want your business to succeed. And it seems like I'm in favor of the overall concept of this negotiation because it does take into account the success of your business and what it needs to thrive over there. And it's busy and it has a lot going on. And I just, I can drop it here, but I'm stating that I want to advocate for really being able to look at and stand up for what Silverton values and our interests and our financial prosperity. We do not need to be at the, beck and call and I don't know how to say it right. I just want to advocate for Silverton's prosperity in addition to and not exclusive of, this is not a mutually exclusive conversation of business owner interest and Silverton town interest.
Trustee Harper.
I believe Trustee Lashley had his hand up first.
Thank you, Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Trustee Harper. I was just interested in asking Mr. Heimbach, from your perspective, we're charged as town trustees here for representing the best interests for the town of Silverton. So our job here is for the public to represent the town of Silverton for the best interest of the town. So I'm just curious from your side of this, the value of this property for you. What do you see as the potential value for you, and do you see this offset by the deal on the table here?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. This doesn't add any more money to my business. My operation stays the same. It's not like it's, you know, it's what I've been using all along. And so this doesn't add anything to my bottom line at all. And when you sell a business, you sell it basically based on your income. So even if the streets were still rented and we were back at square one, my business is worth what my income brings in, not how much land I own. I mean, if I brought in $1 million and owned a quarter of an acre, that I would still get the same price if it was sitting on 5 acres. You understand what I'm saying? So it doesn't make a difference how much land you have, it's how much money and income your business brings in. And this deal doesn't help me bring in any more money at all. In fact, I'm giving up quite a bit of land there. If I remember right, looking at them things, the maps, I'm giving up quite a bit of land to the city. In addition to the stuff that's got to go in the Corps of Engineers conservative or conservation thing. And so so you're not, it didn't seem like you're thinking about that. What about all the blocks that I own that go across the road? I'm giving them up too. So I think there's give and take on both sides here. And I think we've done it. And, and come in at the last minute and say, well, I think you ought to pay us $10,000 a year. That's a lot of money. And if you assess that on any other business in town, that would be a terrible amount of money. We're not like the billionaires that move around these giant ski towns and do whatever they want to do and build condos and have all the money in the world to buy people off or whatever they do to get all their condos built. That's not us. I guess I don't know if I answered your question or not. I forgot it.
Thank you, Mr. Heinbaugh. That does answer my question there. I agree with a lot of your reasoning there that it won't necessarily increase the bottom line in your business. I do, however, think that you owning that property does increase the value of your business. It's not just it's not just the income that you make. It is also the property attached to it as well. But I do appreciate your comments, and I appreciate your candor. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump on there too and say thank you. Your perspective's super helpful. We've been talking about this in a little bit of a vacuum for 4 months. So it's helpful to have a direct line of conversation with you. And I hear you. This definitely does not increase your bottom line. But I do agree with Trustee Lashley that removing the contingent liability that existed when you bought the property and having possibly the largest contiguous acreage that's riverfront-ish next to a potential ski area development does add a lot of value.
Well, I think I sold to the town. I think the town is getting most of that stuff over next to the river.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty valuable property if a ski mountain goes in. Don't you think?
Well, it's valuable from the perspective of maintaining open spaces. Yeah.
Well, if that ski mountain goes in, I would be surprised to see if this stays as an open space myself.
I certainly hope it does.
Well, I hope it does too, but if this turns into a telluride, all bets are off. Big money comes to town, big money does a lot of special things.
Sure. And those types of issues have been top of mind when talking about this. And that's why we've been thinking so hard about, what happens when this deal's over and making sure that we have that, the trail easement to put in a river walk and other things like that in the future.
Right, right. And that's why I agreed to it. But I think you're just you're a little too high on your price. Like I said, if it, what's $10,000 to the town?
Well, I just heard Administrator Ryder talk about potentially reducing staff if we have to go any further. That $10,000 could be, could keep someone at full time, or it could be meaningful.
Yeah, good.
Trustee Harper?
Yeah, I have two things, Mr. Mayor. Number one, if this goes through and as you say, the largest continuous spread down there, wouldn't the property value go up and therefore he'd pay more in taxes? So the town and county would receive more revenue off that? That's number one. And number two, I was under the impression this whole time since we were elected that that's supposed to be designated wetlands. What is this conversation about turning it into potential ski area?
Oh, I think you're mistaken. We're talking about Kendall Mountain development, not this area.
You just said the land across the river right there, the land next to the river. I thought this was
For the
designated
trail.
wetland.
I think the
Yes, it
value
is. I think you're mistaken.
very clear out of Mayor Furman's mouth.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Harper, but I think you misheard.
Okay, I apologize, but I thought that's what I heard because I thought this was designated wetland.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. Thank you
I
for
heard
thank you for
from
clarification.
Well, I said big money could change things, and you agreed with me. Right, Mayor?
No, I listened to you on that point.
Oh, I thought you.
I said our goal is to maintain the open space. I said the values there is open space.
Yeah.
From the town's
So
perspective.
I agreed, but big money could change a lot of things.
Well, we're actively
it's done a
working
lot of the ski towns.
to try to avoid that. Trustee
Yeah.
Lashley?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully that, this area will be in conservation underneath the town. So even if big money could change things, it probably won't now. At least not for the portion that we own down there.
All right, so where are we at? We still had 4 people that wanted to see not a nominal amount in the lease the last time we checked. Mayor Pro Tem.
Does Mr. Heinbaugh have an amount that seems fair to him?
Well, let's see. I think that, yeah, I could donate $5,000 to the city every year. In addition to what we've been doing.
You broke up right when you said the amount.
$5,000.
$5,000. Trustees, do we feel good about $5,000? And would you be okay with it? So you'd be wanting it to be a donation as opposed to a lease payment?
Well, I don't really care what you do with it, but I would like it just as long as it gets used properly.
Thank you. Trustee Lashley.
Thank you, Mayor Furman, and thank you, Mr. Heinbaugh. I think that's pretty generous of you. And I think that I don't know if the trustee discussion should go this way or not, but if we wanted to, earmark it for something good, even $5,000 goes a really long way on the 4th of July, which I know Mr. Heinbaugh is a part of that association towards making sure that we can keep the town beautiful during that weekend with porta potties and dumpsters and things that the town typically throws in for.
Trustee Lashley, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure that we should be earmarking things at this point. Trustee Harper?
I was going to agree with Trustee Lashley 110%. I was the first to donate $10,000, and Mr. Heinbaugh was the second to donate $10,000 on the request of former Mayor Chris Tukey. And I don't know, I didn't think it'd be a bad idea. But if you're saying no, I understand.
I'm just saying we should have a discussion about, you know, where this should go in the budget as opposed to jumping straight to a, wow, we have $5,000, 4th of July, done. I'm not saying that's not how we should use it, but I think maybe we should take a beat. Trustee Birma?
Trustee Lashley, I was agreeing with you, sir. Sorry, I was out of turn, out of line.
You weren't out of line. Just saying we should take a beat. Trustee Birma?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of reiterate that sentiment a little bit of, if it is part of the lease, I don't think it should be earmarked for something specific, but if it's a donation outside of the lease, then I feel like that's more appropriate to maybe earmark it for something if he wanted it to go to something specific.
Well,
Trustee Weaker. Sorry, I cut somebody off. If that was Mr. Heinbaugh, I apologize.
I didn't mean to start a world war here with the $5,000, you know, but I like to, if it seems like kind of a donation to me, and I'd like to see it go somewhere good, you know. But you don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want with the money. It's your money. But I just, you know, it's whatever.
Hours.
Thank you. Trustee Wiegert?
Just really like to thank Mr. Heinbaugh for, you know, for working with us and willing to compromise. And this has been a long, hard road, and just you sticking it out here to the end. And then that a $5,000 deal, I feel like that's a pretty good deal for the town there. Just like to reiterate that I really think the staff has put in a lot of time into this, and more than they know more about the situation than we could ever pretend to know. I think the trustees have brought some good varying perspectives to the table, but I'd also like to emphasize that if we're really going to have a strong town and a strong community, we need to have support and trust in our staff and allow them to work and do their jobs, and then support them when they bring us plans. And it's okay to look for these little loopholes. That's what we're supposed to do. Like I said, I think it's great people bring different perspectives, but I also think that there's a time to support the staff. And I just want to thank them for all their hard work through this. And I hope we can work through a solution tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so it sounds like that issue is concluded. Great. There was one minor thing in the assignment clause that I did talk with
Mr. Mayor,
Attorney Koznick. Yes, I will call on you in just a moment.
No, I'm terribly sorry, but Paul had his hand up.
Yep.
Sorry, as
Attorney
I'm
Koznick.
as well. Mayor, I just wanted, so it'd be $5,000 payable on June, the first day of June each year. Is that what Mr. Heinbaugh is suggesting? I just want to make sure that that's what he wants.
Mr. Heinbaugh?
Yeah, that's fine with me. If it's your budget, I'd say either June or August, but whatever you want to do.
Thank you.
Whatever's easy for you.
Heinbaugh.
What's that?
What's better for you?
It doesn't matter to me. Whatever's great for you guys. Just go ahead. Whenever you want the 5,000, it'll be there.
Thank you. There's just a tweak to the language in the assignment provision of the lease as well that I talked to Attorney Koznick about. It doesn't change the substance of the provision, but we had a miscommunication on what the request was and how it got drafted. And Attorney Koznick mentioned it in the red line. Yeah. Attorney Koznick.
So I believe the red line that you're referring to, it's actually slightly different than what was provided to the board. You asked the question after the materials were provided to the board, but what is being proposed is paragraph 9 would read that Silverton Lakes may not assign this agreement unless the town provides prior written consent, and all other assignments shall be prohibited. So it's just a flip on it. Before we had it drafted in here that that Silverton Lakes would need the town's permission prior to any assignment, but such assignment would not be unreasonably withheld by the town. So this is just switching a little bit, that the town would have the right to kind of review the assignment itself when the request came through. So that's the suggested change there.
With the specific language being not to be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed, so that it's, unless there's a really good reason to withhold the consent, the assumption would be that it would happen. Any issues? Trustee Harper?
I apologize, my Zoom glitched for a second. Can you repeat that last statement, sir?
Yeah, just to clarify, Attorney Kosnick said that the consent wouldn't be unreasonably withheld, but the full request I made was a little bit more generous to say would not be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed, which is something that's often in legal contracts, which means that if the consent is requested, that there's a presumption that you'll say yes unless there's a reasonable reason to say no. As opposed to just saying they have to ask the town consent.
I didn't hear you.
Sure, no worries.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, I don't have any other notes. Attorney Kosnick, yep.
Sorry, one more change that was made in the lease itself, and that was brought to my attention by Mr. Heimbaugh's consultant, that there's a portion of block 11 that has a tent site on it. So that portion would be included in the lease as well. And that's specifically, so you have the north half of block 11 and the east half of the south half of block 11. So it's pretty much all the area that the town would own in block 11 minus the easement area. So sorry, that's complicated kind of sounding, but it's whatever he has existing on block 11 right now.
Thank you. All right. Final, Mr. Heimbaugh has his hand up. Mr. Heimbaugh, did you have another comment?
I'm sorry, I had a pulled muscle. I didn't mean to have my hand up.
No problem. All right, unless there's any further comment, it sounds like we've come to resolution on each of the discussion points and can now go back to entertaining a motion to approve the Ordinance 2020-01 vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and adjacent to the eastern municipal town boundary, subject only to the revisions that we just agreed to as a board to the related documents. Attorney Kosnick?
Mayor, I would just request that maybe Mr. Heimbaugh, if you ask him if he's okay with all the documents that we didn't review prior to, if he could just verbally say if he has any other changes, just so you guys know before approving the ordinance or considering the ordinance here.
Great, thank you. Mr. Heimbaugh?
Yes.
The question specifically, Mr. Heimbaugh, was, were you able to take a look at all the documents that the board is considering tonight? I think you're on mute, Mr. Heimbaugh.
How about now?
Yep.
Now I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I've reviewed them. Like I said, my only concern is the campground road. I need it to run my business.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And the board made a decision in favor of your use of Campground Road.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Would someone like to make a motion? Otherwise, this was all for naught.
Are we making a motion to approve the ordinance so far here, or do we, or the, okay.
Trustee Harper?
Hi, I apologize again. My Zoom is doing one of these things. Are we making a motion?
I was saying that I would entertain such since discussion has completed and we're waiting for someone to make a motion. Trustee Lashley.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-01, an ordinance vacating certain streets and alleys south of County Road 2 and north of Campground Road. Is that sufficient?
Subject to the minor revisions and the related documents.
Subject to the minor revisions.
I'd like to.
Hold on, Attorney Cosnick.
Attorney Cosnick.
So we're going to consider each one separately. So first is going to be the ordinance.
Okay.
Right. And then, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to just second that. I do apologize. It's starting to cut out for a reason.
So you cut out quite a bit. Did you second that motion, Trustee Harper?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Kelly, if you're still here, roll call, please.
Trustee Barilla,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Weigert,
Yes.
trustee Bierma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. So Attorney Cosnick, we need to go through all 6 documents and approve them individually, or can we vote to approve all 6 in a batch, subject to the few revisions we requested?
You could do that. I just like the record to clearly state which revisions for each document. In the first, just to add the quitclaim deed, you're just approving the acceptance of that document because you're not signing that one actually.
Would it be possible, since you've been taking notes and are relatively on top of it, to propose the motion for someone to say, I so move?
Sure. And
just to expedite.
Please follow my motion here. So if I miss something.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be a motion to approve the quitclaim deed as provided in your packet.
Now, if someone would say, I so move, we can.
It probably would be easier if you just did them separately for me, if that's okay.
Trustee Harper?
I just said I so move.
Oh, sorry, Trustee Harper. I didn't hear it.
I'll second that then.
Thank you. So we had a motion by Trustee Harper and a second by Trustee Lashley. Roll call, Kelly, please.
Trustee Barilla,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes, ma'am.
trustee Bierma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
trustee Barney, or Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
I believe you didn't. I don't think my name was called.
Trustee Weigert,
Thank you. Yes.
The next one would be a motion to approve the campground road and trail easement agreement as drafted and provided in your packet.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Trustee Barilla, for making the motion. Trustee Lashley for seconding. Kelly, roll call, please.
trustee Barilla,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bearma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Next item would be a motion to approve the exclusive wetlands easement agreement as drafted and provided in your packet.
I motion.
Second.
Thank you, trustee Harper, for making the motion. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barney, for seconding. Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bearma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Next motion would be, next item, there would be a motion for approval of the declaration of establishment of conditions, covenants, and restrictions as drafted and provided in the board's packet.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, trustee Barella, for the motion and trustee Harper for seconding. Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes, ma'am.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bearma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
Next item would be a motion to approve the amended and restated lease agreement between the town of Silverton and Silverton Lakes RV Resort LLC with a modification to paragraph 1, which is the legal description, and that is modified to add also the east half of the south half of block 11, and a modification to paragraph 2, which is rent, and that would be modified from $10 to $5,000.
In the assignment clause in 9.
In the assignment clause in 9, and Mayor, maybe you could add a little assistance with this one and the exact language that was proposed in here, because I have which shall not be unreasonably withheld.
Right. So that would read, I mean, I think the whole thing can be truncated and just say Silverton Lakes may not assign this agreement except upon the written consent of the town of Silverton, which shall not be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed.
Okay, so that would be the third modification. That'd be paragraph 9.
So moved.
Second.
There, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barney, for the motion and trustee Lashley for the second. Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
No.
trustee Harper,
Yes, let's get this done.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bearma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes.
The last item would be a motion to approve the release and indemnification as drafted and provided in the board's packet.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, trustee Barella, for the motion and trustee Lashley for the second. Kelly, roll call, please.
Trustee Barella,
Yes.
trustee Harper,
Yes, ma'am.
trustee Wager,
Yes.
trustee Bearma,
Yes.
trustee Lashley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Barney,
Yes.
Mayor Furman.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much. We will now move to our closing public comment for this meeting. Mr. Heimbaugh, I see your hands up again. I'm not sure if that's a pulled muscle or an intentional. So if you'd like to talk, the floor is
No,
yours.
I just want to thank you all for your hard work. And I know it's been a challenge.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
And
Thank
willingness
you all,
to work.
and
Thanks,
good night. Anytime.
All right, thank you very much.
right.
Any other public comment at this time? Seeing none, I adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.